And here we have to join us from the Office of Equity are Alegria de la Cruz, Lindsay Franco, and Rubid. And I'm going to hand it all to you to take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we want to first start off by thanking you for inviting us back and opening up the space to have us share more about what we've been up to, our successes and challenges in our racial equity journey, and most importantly, have a conversation about how we continue to work together. So just want to thank you again for being here. It's always a pleasure to be here with you all. Want to make sure you can see my screen and everything's good. So if you can give me a thumbs up, that would be awesome. Great. So we'll move on to the next slide. So I'd just like to start off by introducing our team and myself. My name is Rubid Olvera, and I identify as a Latinx Mexican woman of color. I am currently the community engagement analyst with the office, and I'll pass it on to my teammates to introduce themselves.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Franco. My pronouns are she and her. I am a Black and Creole woman, and I am the office's racial equity and social justice data analyst. So humanizing our data and the people behind the numbers. So great to be with you all here tonight.
Hello.
I'll pass it.
Thank you, Lindsay, Rubid. I'm Alegria de la Cruz. My pronouns are she, ella. I am Chicana, Mexica mixed, and I have the honor and pleasure of directing the Office of Equity. We also have 2 additional staff who are with us in our office, but not able to be here tonight. Melissa Valle, who directs the county's equity program for the Office of Equity, and Dora Estrada, who is our admin aide. And we are also really lucky this summer to have Angel Gonzalez, who is our intern for the summer with us. So all together, we're 3 full-timers, and Lindsay and Rubid are our amazing kind of ARPA funded temporary team that we're working very hard to keep. So as we get started tonight, we just really want to get grounded in the county's definition of equity, recognizing also that in this definition, we stand on the beautiful and strong shoulders of Black leaders throughout our country who've really done some of the leading thinking on how to achieve equity. So Ms. Unique Redwood here is the kind of thought partner who recognize that equity is an outcome, right? That we really need to recognize that the single biggest indicator of how healthy and well and wealthy someone is their race. And so we really work hard to change those disproportionately negative outcomes that communities of color experience. And in order to change those outcomes, we have to have new processes in place. And we have to address the issues of underrepresentation and underservice that have long been things that we in communities of color have fought against. We also recognize that by changing the processes, by essentially creating new tables for decision-making and for input into how to actually achieve these outcomes, that we are lifting up this idea that people who are closest to the challenges are also closest to the solution. And so with that, we'll move into the next way that we are making change inside of our county.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we do what Alegria just talked about. How do we institutionalize equity into government systems? Well, this work is very cyclical. It's not linear, it's ongoing, but these are some of the main practices that we are using. So the first step is just normalizing it. We realize that across the county, across departments, we have to normalize first conversations about racial equity at all within the county. And of course, with the community that we serve, we needed shared language, shared definitions, in constant recognition and understanding that racial disparities exist here in our county. Then we had to organize. The next step is organizing, because 5 people in one office, unfortunately, cannot transform an entire institution, try as we might. So we need everybody to be able to reach a tipping point. We'll dive a little bit deeper into our amazing core team later, but this is the place where we have engaged and organized these employees who are interested in doing this work together and creating the types of structures that we need to support this work. We have affinity spaces for Black and African American employees, non-Black people of color, and white people, since we know that this work is not solely for people of color. And lastly, but not really lastly, because it's a circle, is operationalizing. So this is where we move to implement these implement changes in these harmful policies, programs, and practices through our use of data and through anti-racist performance metrics. This is where we've gotten to get creative and create participatory processes with staff and with communities, really valuing lived experiences to do this co-design of what do new policies look like, what do new procedures look like that can stop and reverse the harm that we've all experienced in these institutions for many centuries.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I want to talk a little bit about the core team. The core team was literally the first thing that the Office of Equity created, because we recognized that at the time we were, I think, 1.2 people in the initial office, and it is a best practice nationally to create this idea of a primary leadership team that includes both formal and informal leaders, essentially people who have positions of authority and power within the institution, and also folks who just really want to get the work done. And that this is the group of people who are responsible for designing and coordinating and organizing and creating racial equity action plans and activities across the entire institution in order to facilitate that change, that systems change. And we really started by recognizing that we want to start with people who want to do this work, who want to find community, who are looking forward to developing those skills, to developing that intentional learning community, to do that transformational work. And we weren't going to start by trying to convince people who don't even necessarily accept that these are our challenges, but really starting with people who wanted to lean in with us. And so the idea here is also making sure that we're challenging hierarchy, right? The county is a very hierarchical institution. And what we're saying is that if you're a part-time extra help interpreter, you've got really amazing things to bring to how we can change the insides of our organization. If you are a part-time extra help person who is doing kind of intake around public benefits, you know more about how people are experiencing our systems in many ways than somebody in these higher positions. And so we built this core team to make sure that there was a space for these folks who really wanted to lean in with us. And we met with their supervisors, their managers, to facilitate having them have time out of their regular workday to do this work, and to recognize that this is also work that every public servant in the County of Sonoma at some point will be required to do and be held accountable for. But we also really wanted to take an opportunity to understand what those immediate issues facing Black, Indigenous, and people of color inside of this institution was, and also a sense of what opportunities were coming out of people's experiences, right? Imagining what it means to have collective strength, imagining what's possible when we create collective brilliance. And so over and over again, in talking to people, we heard about the need for safe spaces. We heard a lot of ways in which these conversations around race equity have gone really wrong, have created a lot more harm. And we've seen the painful examples of the reality that has impacted more than any other population, Black leaders, right? Who shared powerful and honest statements about their experiences and who really challenged us to do better because we know better. So what we did was design an idea of starting in affinity groups, as Lindsay mentioned, recognizing that it's a really rare thing for Black and Indigenous and people of color, as well as white people, to have protected spaces in which to learn together and to build community around our identities. And so we stayed in affinity for these initial stages of learning together, really centering safety and community for our learning program, for the beginning stages of actually creating these skill sets together. And we spent 2 hours a week for 12 weeks learning together in these brave spaces. So I want to invite Lindsay, and I don't know if Chantel has joined yet, to share a little bit about kind of what it meant to first create affinity and then what it means to learn in affinity, because we've moved from affinity sessions into actual learning together, but staying in these safe spaces.
Yeah, I'd like to invite Chantel to start. I see you're here. Okay.
Yeah, so it was an amazing experience. The relationships that we built. So just having the opportunity to meet with other individuals who work with the county, work for the county, who are African heritage. And there's only 7 of us, I think, starting off. And initially, you know, we kind of just got to know each other, right? And what was created there, like you said, was a safe space. You know, we got to talk about some of the stuff. I've worked for the county for 17 years, and some of the stuff that we've endured as employees for the county, we were able to actually talk about it and not be shamed about it. We were there to support each other. We created this bond where, you know, we have someone to lean on. And then they brought in, I don't know, a consultant company, and the people who ran it were African-American. And just listening to them, right, kind of guide us through everything that we've gone through at the county, right? And these experience, being able to not only shed positive like interaction between us, but then they gave us opportunities to see like a Black utopia. How would that look like in an area like this, you know? And it was like just kind of mind blowing to even think, you know, could we have something like that? Why can't we have something like that? So the relation, and we all came from different walks of life, right? You know, different backgrounds, but we shared one thing in common, you know, being African-American, working for the county. Most of us were the only people, right, that on our job that were African-American. How does that feel, right? People, you know, at one point in time, we kind of talked to someone who thought, well, why would you only want a Black affinity group? And then once you kind of explained, and it was another African-American woman, and once we explained it to her, or I explained it to her, she was like, wow, you know, you're right, you know, because the stuff that I have endured on the job, and being able to share stuff like that with somebody, and then having support, right? Because it's high stress, always having to code switch, or as I say, my Blackness offends people sometimes. It comes off hard, it comes off strong, right? So navigating that, like I said, I've been working for the county for 17 years, and always trying to live like that 8 hours a day. That is toxic. That's toxic. And what I've experienced at the county has been toxic as an African-American woman. So just being able to have that space of support and really love. We've grown so much together, the group that we've started, and trying to create some projects. And so this, once we started this affinity group, this has been the best thing that's happened to me at the county. Having a space to just be myself and create self-love for our culture. So thank you.
Thank you, Chantel, for sharing that.
Thank you so much, Chantel. And I feel like I can't even follow that. But I came into the Black Affinity Group series a little late in the game after they had already done this foundation setting. And so I've just been a part of it for about just a few months. But in that short time, it has been so amazing to create this bond with these incredible people. And it's like you realize that you're neighbors. You know, I get to run into these folks just kind of looking out my window, and to have that sense of connection is something I didn't really have because I have been so isolated, whether it's in this job or former jobs in the county. You know, although I'm new to Sonoma County as an employee, I've lived here for 7 years, and this is the most connected I've felt to community, is having this affinity space. And so just kind of the 3 main words that it kind of leaves me with is connection, belonging, and activation. It gets us up to do this work and to stay in this work and maintain. So thank you for that space, and back to you.
Thank you. So recognizing the importance of continuing this work, we went to the board during budget hearings to ask for affinity space in particular to be continued to be funded and supported. We, as Chantel mentioned, have some really excellent skilled facilitators, people who have been doing and building these communities all over the country. And we wanted to stay working with them and to have an opportunity to continue thinking about who we would work with here locally to continue holding these spaces. The board ultimately decided not to fund that request during this budget hearing, and we have an opportunity to go back in September for another bite at the apple. And so if you'd like to join us to raise your voices about the importance of creating safe spaces for Black people and for people of color, as well as for white people to learn together at the county. We would invite you to come in and stay connected with that effort at the county as we continue to build our programs. I'm going to pass it over to Rubith for the next slide here.
Thank you so much. Great learning, and I'm always so appreciative of this work. So we wanted to continue this work, right? We knew that it was important and that we needed to continue it. So also recognizing that we wanted BIPOC staff to also help us lead this work, ensuring that we were providing the additional support and training that it's needed to do this type of work. So in front of you, you'll see that there are a couple of kind of pathways that folks can choose from to get trained on and other opportunities for learning. And so we have our train the trainer session that was our most recent kind of area and part where we learned a lot about facilitation skills to really build our greater muscle and practice how to both navigate and lead race conversations. Now we'll have folks from that group that attended the session that will help us co-create a leadership training for department heads and board of supervisors. So we want to make sure that the message is shared all across at all levels, right? We also have our racial equity centered results-based accountability that really requires us to ask whether the money spent by the county is actually making a difference for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. And it's a part of a rigorous 7-step process that's designed to achieve equitable outcomes in our design work. And lastly, we have our Office of Equity Steering Committee that is helping us finalize our values, vision, and mission statements for the office, and ultimately help us design a racial equity action plan for the county internally. So like I said, we have different range of options for folks to choose from so that they have different opportunities to participate and really co-design this process with us.
Thank you, Rubith. So I wanted to just share a little bit, an update from last year. I know when I came to you last year, we were talking about having just created the core team. And now we've got a million and one amazing things on our plates that are really facilitated from having this additional capacity inside of the county with these folks who are trained up and in many ways getting ready to activate this work. The other thing about the Office of Equity is that we're really both kind of internally as well as externally focused. So right now our biggest focus is internal. It's in this equitable organization creation. So we are responsible for, on the far kind of left side there, implementing the county strategic plan, and then doing a lot of work with other departments to figure out like how to approach an issue from an equity frame. How are you looking at race and language and ethnicity and geography as you think about resource allocation, as you think about policy design? How are you making sure that that analysis and that data is being used in these decisions? We do a lot of community relations, both internally within departments and externally, like this presentation with you. And inside of the county, we also did some work to support the Department of Emergency Management in creating an analysis around how culturally competent is the County of Sonoma in its emergency operations planning. Moving into the middle part of this slide here, the first big piece of stuff that we kind of bit into, which Lindsay and Rubith will talk about in a little bit, is the ARPA allocation process. And so we jumped right into the middle of making sure that funds that were provided by the federal government to address the impacts of the COVID pandemic in our community really went to those communities that were most impacted. And so we've been deeply engaged and so grateful to have Rubith and Lindsay to really kind of increase our muscle inside of the Office of Equity to do this work. So with that came some county investments into the way the county is able to be culturally responsive to the communities that it serves. And in 2 areas, language access and community engagement, Rubith's going to talk about a little bit about that later. I'm really focused in that area. The other thing that we've been really engaged in is the Portrait of Sonoma. So this is an update to a report that was done in 2014. And this is the update using the 2020 census data and taking a good hard look at how far have we come or how far have we slipped. And in the case of the portrait, you know, Lindsay will talk a little bit about that in a bit. It's very clear that we have a lot of work to do. And so what the Office of Equity has done is really lifted up some of the holes in traditional data collection and analysis practices that can create additional harm, or basically to double down by saying that communities, especially communities like the African American, Black community, Native American populations, are so small that they're statistically insignificant. We know that that's BS, and it's our job to make sure that we call that out, and that we also do a lot of work to shine lights into those places. And we do that by creating and co-designing with community members something called the Agenda for Action. Other things where the board has kind of jumped in and said, Office of Equity, we need your help in this, is around specifically like, what does long-term recovery look like with an equity lens, recognizing that communities of color continue to be disproportionately represented in negative impacts after disasters. We have a real ton of work in front of us to figure out what long-term recovery looks like with an equity frame. And in that is also kind of expanding disaster insurance for those folks who might not qualify for unemployment insurance during a disaster, or in any other ways of getting help during disasters. Other places where the board has asked us to step in is in the reframing and redrafting of a project labor agreement for the county that covers its essentially its agreements with labor organizations when big construction projects are undertaken. Then the last area, which has been of controversy of late, is the program that the county has run over the last few years during fires of allowing farm workers access to emergency evacuation zones, places where no other people are allowed to be, but the county has allowed for workers to come in and to engage in agricultural activity during fires. So those are the kind of big policy areas where the Office of Equity is also currently engaged to support the board in making fully informed decisions about what it is deciding on in these policy areas.
Yes, so this is a little bit about our involvement in ARPA. So in about March of 2021, ARPA was signed into law, and Sonoma County got a $96 million allocation of these federal funds, with 39 available for community resilience programs. You've been able to hear a little bit about the ones that were funded for Sonoma County Black Forum tonight. So our office saw an opening in that legislation because the legislative intent recognized and accepted that there was this disproportionate impact on communities of color. So we offered to help, AKA made sure that we were in the mix to ensure that the promise of this incredible piece of legislation and the resources that it's made available for so many people are actually getting into the hands of those hardest hit, who we saw just by living life here, and we saw through the data that was collected during this time that these were our Black, Indigenous, and Latinx community members. They were hit the hardest, so we need to see the greatest impact within those communities. The language and focus of ARPA allowed us to do that. It allowed us to grow. Again, that's why Rubid and I are able to be here and be part of this project. And it allowed us to accelerate the work of the office to be able to address these more intense impacts of the pandemic, as well as so many other disasters that have happened, both now and in the past, on people of color, to be able to develop and imagine outcomes and create some strategies that focus on well-being of communities of color in Sonoma County. Revolutionary. So other new opportunities that were available through ARPA was that it was designed from start to where we are now to ensure that money is going, again, into the hands of those identified community members, versus an we serve everyone the same concept. And again, that's the definition of equity, is not everybody's going to need the same thing. So different processes are leading to the different outcomes. We also get to do extensive, I say get to do, this is again, my love. We get to do extensive data disaggregation and collection of race, ethnicity, language, sex, gender identity, and location, and training to the folks who are going to be collecting these methods on how to collect this data with dignity. There are federal minimums on what we need to collect, but we would like to go above and beyond that again, so we can reflect who we are here in Sonoma County. We're also utilizing equity-centered results-based accountability to be able to identify what our intended results look like. How do we know if we're doing this right? And so this we get to collect by priority area and with the people doing this work. We also supported partnerships between organizations that have historically not been able to access federal funding, including many BIPOC organizations. So we're so excited to be working with folks who have never worked with the government before. We've done extensive community engagement and collaboration through an ARPA equity work group, the proposal review committee, which was great because it was also reflective more of community, and had a participatory process, which led to a little bit of power sharing as the recommendations from that group were unanimously passed by the Board of Supervisors. I'm ready for the next slide. Okay, so again, I know I'm the data nerd, but this chart right here is very moving. It is powerful and it's super important because this is the first time that Sonoma County has been able to capture this level of data to see what's going on in communities disaggregated by race. This is super powerful and important because communities of color across Sonoma County and the nation demanded this info. We kept asking who is sick, who is dying. Sorry, this slide really makes me emotional. Communities of color demanded this information and this level of tracking locally, statewide, and nationwide. We know this pandemic hit people differently, and it hit our communities the hardest. It hit essential workers and residents with the least access to resources to support their health. We know through stories and now data that cumulative case rates of people of color have far surpassed those of white, non-Hispanic people, especially when taking into account population size. There were such stark, real generational inequities that have just jumped up off the charts, and these are indisputable.
From this demographic data in ways that, again, we never had before. Again, thanks to the demands from the community requesting this demographic data and COVID rates be shared. Grounded in what we learned about the lack of communication between government and community and the lack of resources and accessibility for BIPOC communities, lack of language access and disasters, we knew that it was here that where we had to start more conversation about health equity and what that looked like. This is where you got to see the Latinx health work begin. Now it's the health equity work group, and that space has been changing, but really a space for community organizations and leaders to share best practices on how we can improve our services and engagement. The Office of Equity recognized that the importance of continuing this work beyond COVID. And we applied for ARPA funds to support the cultural responsiveness within our internal county systems. These were investments in capacity that were board approved. And as part of the 96 million from the ARPA funds, the county allocated a total of 710,000 for cultural responsiveness, which includes the community engagement plan and the language justice and access plan. Both plans, most importantly, will be co-designed with community members and valuing people's time with stipends for their participation in the process. We really look forward to having you all join us in the creation of these plans later this year, as the board will vote on the recommendation for these consultants that was selected by an all BIPOC review committee. So this will go on in September.
All right, and so I believe this group is familiar with our Portrait of Sonoma 2021 update, but we worked with Measure of America to calculate the well-being of our Sonoma County residents. And this was done through census data around education, health, wealth, and well-being. This very clearly steered us to 4 neighborhoods that fell under a 4.0 HDI score. And as well as showed that the most significant decline was within the Black community. We also identified the pieces of information that were missing. Again, this was census data, so there's many things that aren't captured as well as the history of kind of confidence in those filling out the census. Therefore, we wanted to expand on this by doing our own information with community to find out what is the deeper story. Also to understand, is there any actual true progress, or again, is there a deeper story behind the numbers and behind the decline and increases? For the community collaboration process, we've identified, again, those 4 under 4 census tracts. There'll be a series of community conversations to reach out. And then for the agenda for action focus groups, these are the groups, again, that were not super well represented within the Portrait of Sonoma data that we would like to seek out and hear from and understand better. And whether that's through trusted messengers and trusted sources in the community, cultural brokers who have this information and are already doing this work.
Thank you, Lindsay. And as part of the agenda for action, we really hold closely the words from Justice Reform Advocate Glennie Martin, who shares, people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from power and resources. And you'll hear us say that time and time again, because we really center ourselves in the work that we do when we're working with community members. And as part of the Portrait of Sonoma, we want to make sure that we're not letting the data simply live in the portrait report, but we're really holding ourselves accountable and ensuring that the community identifies its goals, priorities, actions, and addresses to address disparities in Sonoma County. We know that you all have already started this leadership and have urged and organized for what you want to see in Sonoma County. And it's our job to continue to uplift those and uplift the solutions proposed by the Black leaders in the agenda for action. So in our work to create that, we want to make sure that this is a co-created process. Currently, we are designing what the community conversations and focus groups will look like. And you'll hear more about that later on this year. But we really wanted to make sure to take the opportunity to share kind of where we're at in the portrait, what's coming. And so we'll have a series of data walks or community conversations and focus groups, and really leaning into communities that have already been doing this work. And also with what we're learning throughout this community conversations and focus groups, we want to make sure that we're tying that back and informing the metrics that are being used for performance in the ARPA proposals. So that's really important for us as well. We're learning through this process that it's important to continue to lean in with community rather than coming in and saying, these are the things that need to happen. So we want to make sure that we're doing that and being respectful of that in the process.
Thank you so much, Lindsay and Robit, for sharing kind of your beautiful design thinking around the agenda for action and how you both came into the Portrait of Sonoma as kind of like your baptism by data fire. But it was a really important effort for the Office of Equity to challenge traditional ways of thinking about our community. And we really heard over and over again, especially from the Black community, how harmful it was to be so erased, to not be seen and to not be heard in, in really important official reports that come from the County of Sonoma. And so this was really our effort to challenge that and to also create something that that leaned in and created a space that was different than had been created before. The Agenda for Action in 2014 was created by a bunch of folks and sitting behind closed doors in a county office. And we are really excited about the ways in which the Agenda for Action with this update is going to be created, in parks and community centers, in NAACP meetings, but with and for community. And I wanted to really ground us tonight and close our presentation recognizing or sharing that we recognize the powerful shoulders on which we stand, and how important it is for us at the Office of Equity to be grounded in our history and our local history with love and pride for the work of Black leaders that lead us to those solutions that have long been presented and demanded. And so these are articles that are from a book that more than one person in this meeting today has shared with us. And we close our meeting tonight with gratitude for the work and life of Reverend Ann Graybird. We could go to the next slide there. We just really pulled out from these articles here, you know, a recognition that the NAACP has been leading on these issues and raising solutions for generations. And we are so grateful and just really wanted to share that level of gratitude for your leadership generationally in creating these solutions and calling out these, you know, school systems, 500 employees, all white, and then immediately hiring 2 Black people as janitors, right? Those are sadly solutions that are still raised by institutions today. And we are really grateful to have an opportunity to join with you in saying those are not solutions that have been raised by powerful people in this community for a long time now. And working with you to make sure that we are elevating what you have identified through your power and your love and pride for your lived experiences. And so go to the next slide, Rubik. Joining you in just being thankful for this powerful work of generations. And I want to see if somebody wants to read this quote from the Reverend Graybird, because this is everything about what it is that we do and how we come to you and to this work. Can somebody read that for me?
I can read that.
Thank you, Nathan.
If you don't know anybody, how can you have a relationship? It should be obvious. All of us need to do the work of change. I decided part of my life purpose is to keep saying that. Reverend Ann Graybird. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to close our presentation tonight to let you know that we are joining that call to action, and we are making it our purpose to continue to lean in to doing the work of change in the County of Sonoma with you. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you.
Questions, comments, thoughts?